कि हमारा मदरसा अल-कुबा उसका कोई और मकसद नहीं है। मैं सिर्फ ये चाहता हूँ कि अहले सुन्नत के कुछ अफराद नौजवान तैयार हो जाएं, हमें बच्चे दें और मौलवी लें।
Yes, so we were saying that there's two positions. Some ulama have said that it's both of them. Some of them have said that the key one is just testifying with the heart. So what does it mean to testify with the heart? It basically means that even if your tongue is saying something else, like imagine for example somebody puts a gun to your head and says denounce faith, leave Islam. Now here, if a person with the tongue only leaves Islam, but the heart is affirms the truth of Islam, then this person is still regarded to be Muslim. So the key component, as some ulama have said, is just the heart, right? Then some have gone further and they've said that in order for you to be classed as a Muslim for the purposes of the hereafter, then the heart is enough. But in order for the rules of Islam to apply in the dunya, like when you die, for there to be a janazah, for you to be buried with the Muslims, for you to be able to marry Muslim men and women, in this situation, then you have to affirm it with the tongue. There has to be an outward affirmation with the tongue. But simply put, outwardly and inwardly, there has to be an acceptance of Islam. That's true Iman. That is true Iman. وأن جميع ما أنزل الله تعالى في القرآن وجميع ما صح عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من الشرع والبيان كله حق. He says that we affirm that everything which was revealed by Allah Ta'ala in the Quran and everything which is properly associated and attributed to the Prophet ﷺ and coming from the Prophet ﷺ regarding the Sharia, regarding the bayan of the beliefs and the rules of Islam, all of that, every part of that we affirm to be true. So here can you see how Imam Al-Tahawi, after going through the detailed parts of the discussion in the earlier part of the text, now he's moving into more generic statements. It doesn't stay like that till the end, but this part of the work, you see that there's a lot more generic statements that he starts to bring in here. So you see that this is an example of a generic statement which summarizes the entirety of our belief. Now this isn't so far from what we were brought up learning. When I say we, I'm talking about us, like I and you. So we're all like pretty much Pakistani, Bengali type, that sort of approach. And the books that we were studying when we were in the masjid, like the namaz book, what was the first thing that they taught you in the namaz book? Iman Mufassal and Iman Mujmal. I'm not going to test anyone, but I hope you know Iman Mufassal, Iman Mujmal, right? We didn't forget it. We were from the generation that have live recorded stuff. Right? Iman Mufassal and Iman Mujmal. Iman Mufassal was the detailed Iman. Yani amantu billahi wa malaikatihi wa kutubihi wa rusulihi wa yawmil akhir till the end, right? Iman Mujmal, what does Mujmal mean? Mufassal, what does it mean? And Mujmal, what does it mean? Iman Mufassal means that this is the detailed explanation of Iman. You need to believe in those 7-8 things. Amantu billahi wa malaikatihi wa kutubihi wa rusulihi wal yawmil akhiri wal qadri khayrihi wa sharrihi min Allah ta'ala wal ba'thi ba'da al-maut. This is the some detailed laying out of the components of Islam and Iman. And belief in Allah and the angels and the books and the akhirah and destiny and so on and life after death. The second one, which was Iman Mujmal, this is like a summary belief. It's not the details, it's just a summary. Right? What's Iman Mujmal? Amantu billahi kama huwa bi asma'ihi wa sifatihi wa qabiltu jami'a ahkamihi iqrarun bil lisan wa tasdiqun bil qalb. Iqrar bil lisan, same words that Imam Al-Tahawi used. Wa tasdiqun bil qalb, qalb and jinan are the same thing. Qalb and jinan, same thing, means heart. So here now, what do we see? That which we learned growing up was the Aqidah of the Ahlul Sunnah as the previous ulama had mentioned it to be. As for example, you see Imam Al-Tahawi mentioning it here. So this idea of having detailed discussions on Iman and having generic discussions on Iman, this is something which is widespread across the Ummah, whether it's in the Arab world, Egyptians, the Indo-subcontinent. It's something that we find throughout. Now that Imam Tahawi has set out to us what Iman is, now there's a question. And it's a question which the scholars of Aqidah have raised in their different works. The Hanafis and the Maturidis, which is what we are, they take a position on this, which is the question, does Iman increase and decrease? So can we say that Iman has increased? And can we say that Iman has decreased? Now in simple terms, what's the answer? We as the Ahlul Sunnah, we say that Iman doesn't increase and decrease. Iman doesn't increase and doesn't decrease. Why? Now, this is the bit to understand. Iman is an opposite of something. What's Iman the opposite of? What do you think? Kufr, right? The opposite of Iman is Kufr, which means that if you have less Iman, then what does that otherwise translate as? Having more Kufr. And if you have less Kufr, that means you have more Iman. Kufr and Iman can't come together in the same place. You're either a believer or a disbeliever. You don't mix the two. The two can't mix. So now what do we say here? We say that Iman doesn't increase and doesn't decrease. Rather what happens, a person's Iman might get stronger, a person's Iman might get weaker in regards like to the conviction that one has in regards to faith, but the essence of Iman, that doesn't change. That doesn't change. Iman doesn't increase, doesn't decrease, it stays the same. So it doesn't increase and it doesn't decrease. That's what Imam Tahawi is now going to answer. This goes back, like to those of you that are interested, if you want to study or read a book that's written by or attributed to Imam Abu Hanifa and what his beliefs were, read one of his books called Al-Fiqh Al-Akbar. Al-Fiqh Al-Akbar. It's available in English and it's a very good read. I think it'll be very good for you guys now as well because you've gone through this book already in some detail. Al-Fiqh Al-Akbar. Particularly there's a publication by White Thread Press. They're the publishers, White Thread Press. It's called Al-Fiqh Al-Akbar and it's got like explanations of the points and it's very well set out. It's a really nice book. It's got a lot of details in the footnotes as well as the explanation and it pulls from different works. Have a read of that. If you go back to Al-Fiqh Al-Akbar, which is Imam Abu Hanifa's work, and if you remember at the beginning of this text I gave you Imam Abu Hanifa's chain back to the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, so you can see it's very close. Imam Abu Hanifa says pretty much the same thing about Iman not increasing and not decreasing. So what does Imam Tahawi mention? He says, وَالْإِيمَانُ وَاحِدٌ وَأَهْلُهُ فِي أَصْلِهِ سَوَاءٌ وَالتَّفَاضُلُ بَيْنَهُمَا بِالْخَشْيَةِ وَالتُّقَى وَمُخَالَفَةِ الْهَوَى وَمُلَازَمَةِ الْأَوْلَى. So he says Iman is one. In other words, it's something which is, as I said earlier, there's either Iman or there's either Kufr. It's one thing. It doesn't increase or decrease. So Iman is one, and the people of Iman in regards to Iman itself are all the same. Right? In regards to the essence of Iman, they're all the same. However, how is there variation? How is there increase and decrease in ranks? It says that the variation between them is by their khashya, their fearing of Allah Ta'ala, their tuqa, their God consciousness, وَمُخَالَفَةِ الْهَوَى, going against their desires, fighting their desires, وَمُلَازَمَةِ الْأَوْلَى, and sticking firmly to those matters which are better, the good acts. By these actions, the more a person is God-fearing, God-conscious, stays away from evil, you would say that that person's Iman is not more, because we don't have the idea of more or less, do we, in Iman, but stronger. That Iman is stronger. And the person who may not have this, like might be sinful, might have, missing this and doing wrong things, we wouldn't say that that person has less Iman. That person has less Iman, we don't say that, because for us, Iman doesn't increase or decrease. Rather, what we would say is that person's Iman is weaker. It's a little bit weaker. So, how does one strengthen Iman? The answer Imam Tahawi gives, surround yourself with goodness. One who surrounds himself with goodness, that by the surrounding yourself with goodness, that Iman will be increased and strengthened. So when they say increased, I use that word on purpose just then. Iman will be increased. In other words, what do they mean when they say that? They don't mean actually increased. Rather it means strengthened. So just remember that Iman doesn't increase or decrease, because as I said, if you increase in Iman, what does it mean? You lessen in kufr. If you decreased in Iman, you increased in kufr. It doesn't work like that, because as Imam Al-Tahawi says, Al-Imanu Wahid. وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ كُلُّهُمْ أَوْلِيَاءُ الرَّحْمَنِ وَأَكْرَمُهُمْ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَطْوَعُهُمْ وَأَتْبَعُهُمْ لِلْقُرْآنِ. He says that the believers, all of them are the awliya of Allah. All of them are the awliya of Allah. Meaning, all of them have this strong connection with Allah Ta'ala. They all have this beloved connection with Allah Ta'ala. But the most noble of the believers, even though they're all beloved to Allah, but the ones who have the most nobility and the greatest closeness to Allah Ta'ala are who? The ones who are most obedient to Him, and the ones who are the most strict in following the teachings of the Quran. That's your benchmark. That's your benchmark. Remember, we talked about this a couple of lessons ago. Your benchmark doesn't come from how many miracles you can perform and how much, all of this stuff. It means nothing. Like if I was to come into class flying, that means nothing. It really means nothing. I can't fly, by the way. I have some questioning looks different. I can't fly. But if I did, does that make me some really pious wali of Allah? No, it doesn't. It means nothing. The birds can fly. If flying was the measure of wilaya, then the birds are the ghawses of our time. It doesn't work like that. Miracles aren't the measure. What's the measure? Taqwa. God consciousness. This idea of atwa'uhum, yani this being more obedient to Allah Ta'ala. The more you follow the Quran. A person who doesn't fly, never performs miracle, nobody takes shifa at his hands, nobody has ever witnessed anything special from him, but they never see anything against the Quran from him, those are the awliya of our time. In today's time, you want to see who's the wali of our time, look at those who have adherence to the Quran and the Sunnah. Don't look for miracles. Remember, fix the measure in your minds. That when you look unto somebody and you want to see, is this person somebody worthy of listening to? Is this somebody worthy of following? Is this somebody worthy of giving our time to? Then consider the measure. The measure is, when I see this person, do I think of Allah and His Messenger, or do I think of somebody else? Is this somebody who's calling me to Allah and His Messenger, or is this somebody who's calling me to his pocket? And then you get your answer. Anyone who calls you to themselves, that person is flawed. And anyone who called you to Allah and His Messenger, those are the people worthy of being followed, especially in our times. وَأَصْلُ الْإِيمَانِ هُوَ الْإِيمَانِ بِاللَّهِ وَمَلَائِكَتِهِ وَكُتُبِهِ وَرُسُلِهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ وَالْقَدْرِ خَيْرِهِ وَشَرِّهِ وَحُلْمِهِ وَمُرِّهِ مِنَ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى وَنَحْنُ مُؤْمِنُونَ بِذَلِكَ كُلِّهِ وَلَا نُفَرِّقُ بَيْنَ أَحَدٍ مِّن رُّسُلِهِ وَنُصَدِّقُهُمْ كُلَّهُمْ عَلَى مَا جَاءُوا بِهِ. So he says that the essence of Iman rests on believing in Allah, believing in His angels, believing in His books, in His messengers, in the last day and in the day of judgment, destiny, the good of it and the bad of it, the sweet of it and the bitter of it, all of it being from Allah Ta'ala. And we believe in all of that. We do not distinguish between any of His messengers. What does that sentence mean? It means that in terms of them being messengers, we don't say that one of them is more of a messenger than the other. In terms of messengership, in terms of risala, they're all the same. In terms of ranks, they're different. So the two verses, this verse here, لَا نُفَرِّقُ بَيْنَ أَحَدٍ مِّن رُّسُلِهِ, this is in regards to the essence of being messengers. But when it comes to their ranks, then we go تِلْكَ الرُّسُلُ فَضَّلْنَا بَعْضَهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ, that they are the messengers of Allah. فَضَّلْنَا بَعْضَهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ, that we, and Allah Ta'ala says, we have given rank to some of them over others. And then finally he says, at the end of this chapter, we testify and we affirm all of that which the previous messengers have brought. So remember, we were talking last lesson where we were saying that the messengers of the previous ummahs, like Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam, Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam, all the previous messengers, they are messengers as well. We believe in all of the messengers. We don't have this distinction between our Prophet ﷺ and those prophets in the essence of being messengers. Our Prophet ﷺ is not more of a messenger than those previous messengers. But in terms of rank, our Prophet ﷺ has the highest rank. That's how we would affirm these discussions. Any questions so far? Anyone? Either side? No? Is it making sense, or going over people's heads, or what's happening? Everyone's very quiet today. So increasing or decreasing is like this quality. It's like a quantity even. It has a quantitative way of looking at it, more or less. Whereas strength of Iman or weakness is more of a quality. That's the simplest way of dealing with it. It's more of a quality. So the essence of Iman stays the same. It doesn't get bigger or smaller, but it gets stronger or weaker. Okay? Good. Next section, he says, وَأَهْلُ الْكَبَائِرِ مِنْ أُمَّةِ مُحَمَّدٍ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ فِي النَّارِ لَا يَخْلُدُونَ إِذَا مَاتُوا وَهُمْ مُوَحِّدُونَ وَإِنْ لَمْ يَكُونُوا تَائِبِينَ بَعْدَ أَنْ لَقُوا اللَّهَ عَارِفِينَ مُؤْمِنِينَ. So he says that, so what's he answering here firstly? Because when these chapters are written, usually what they do is they're addressing some ill belief of the groups of Muslims that were misguided. So from the previous groups of Muslims that there was a group which believed that if a person does a major sin, he become a kafir. And therefore major sins would mean that a person remains in the fire of hell forever. What do we believe as the Ahlul Sunnah? We believe, now just a few bullet points and then it'll all click into place. Number one, a person who dies as a Muslim, provided you die as a Muslim, you will eventually end up in Jannah forever. The key condition is dying upon Islam. You have to die as a believer. If you die as a believer, then eventually you will remain in paradise forever. That's the first point. Point number two, if a person was to die as a disbeliever, then that person will go into the fire of hell forever. The middle point is this: if a person dies as a believer, but they have sins that they have yet to be accounted for, then it's possible for a believer, Muslim, to go to the fire of hell, but only temporarily. Yani, Allah Ta'ala will not sentence a person to the fire of hell forever, provided they're a Muslim. But can they go to the fire of hell temporarily, for a short period, or whatever period Allah Ta'ala wills? Yes. But will they remain in the fire of hell forever? The answer is no. Why not? Why not? Yes, that as well, but what's the condition that we just talked about? Because they're believers. So the idea now is, now I'm going to use an Arabic term, but it's not going to be complicated. We affirm the possibility of dukhul in the fire of hell, but we don't affirm the possibility of khulud in the fire of hell. What does dukhul and khulud mean? Dukhul means we affirm the possibility of entering the fire of hell for the sinful believers, but we don't affirm the possibility of remaining there forever. There was a group that said that if you do a major sin, then you enter the fire of hell forever. What does Imam Al-Tahawi say addressing those people? He says, the Ahlul Kabair min ummati Muhammadin sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Yani those people who fall into major sins, those people of the ummah of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, they may enter the fire of hell. Yani they can, it's jaiz, it's mumkin, it's possible for those people to enter the fire of hell, but la yakhludun, but they won't remain in the fire of hell forever. What's the condition? إِذَا مَاتُوا وَهُمْ مُوَحِّدُونَ. When they die in a condition of being muwahid, in a condition, in a state of tawheed, they die in a state of being a believer. As long as you leave this world in a state of being a believer, then a person will not stay in the fire of hell forever. Yeah.
How do you know if you die as a believer?
How?
Obviously, if I die today or tomorrow, will there be signs for me to realize or recognize that I haven't died as a Muslim, or whether I'm going to find that out later?
As in for the person dying or for those around him? But for the person dying, it'd be very obvious. The way the angel of death comes to a person, if it comes in a good form, then that's a good sign of Iman. And if it comes in a bad form, then that's obviously a dangerous sign. And then obviously what happens immediately after death and the punishments and this, that, the other. It'll be very, very clear to that person. As for those around, this is a very good question. There isn't no certain way. Like for example, let me tell you, somebody dies screaming, writhing in pain, and then leaves this dunya, and another person dies ever so peacefully, you can't even tell that he just passed away. Is the first death any worse than the second death? No. You're all saying no because we've had this discussion before, right? But the urf, the general understanding is that screaming, writhing, paining death was really bad. That was a bad death. He must have been a bad person. But what we know of death is, but firstly, number one, the Prophet ﷺ, he had the pains of death, sakaratul maut. So the pains of death doesn't mean that it's a bad death. The Prophet ﷺ had pains of death. Right? Number two, what's to say that the last moments that Allah Ta'ala gave this person on this world, he had a few sins left, or maybe he had a few spiritual ranks to raise. He can't get up and pray, he can't do istighfar. The pains of death are a kafara for those, and all his sins are forgiven before he left this world. So the answer to the second part of the question is, for those around, you have good opinions of the dead. That's why the advice that the Prophet ﷺ gave was, speak well of your dead. Like we talked about last week, I think. Speak well of the dead. وَإِن لَمْ يَكُونُوا تَائِبِينَ بَعْدَ أَنْ لَقُوا اللَّهَ عَارِفِينَ مُؤْمِنِينَ. Even if they didn't do tawbah when they died, right, after meeting Allah Ta'ala, so long as they died knowing Allah and believing in Allah. Because when a person dies, what are we left to in reality? We're left to the mercy of Allah. We're left to the mercy of Allah. And that's why you should always be careful to say things like, oh, Allah won't forgive that person, or you're not going to get forgiven, are you? These are some of the most dangerous things that a person can say. Who are I or you to limit the mercy of Allah? Like, you can have the most sinful of people in the face of this earth, and Allah could just say, I'm forgiven. You're forgiven. When you read the stories of the awliya of the past and people seeing them in their dreams later, and they're like, why were you forgiven? I wasn't forgiven for the nights of ibadah and this. I saw an animal drowning and I picked it up and Allah Ta'ala forgave me. You know, the prostitute who puts water in her shoe for the dog, Allah Ta'ala forgives her for that despite her sins. The guy who kills like 100 people and then he's on the way to the lands of goodness, Allah Ta'ala forgives him for that. It's not for I and you to limit mercy, let alone based on what we assume to be the case by what we've seen. Because the reality of what we see is very different to what we appear to see. وهم في مشيئته وحكمه إن شاء غفر لهم وعفى عنهم بفضله كما ذكر عز وجل في كتابه ويغفر لما دون ذلك لمن يشاء. So here he says that those believers who have done sins, they are left to the Mashi'ah of Allah, meaning they are left to the will of Allah, however He wills. Remember, there's that verse which the Prophet ﷺ used to read in his night prayers, in his nawafil, and he would literally read it again and again and again and again with tears flowing down his eyes. It relates the story of when Isa ﷺ will be raised on the Day of Judgment, and Allah Ta'ala will ask him and say, did you tell the people to worship you and worship your mother? And he will say, Ya Allah, I didn't tell them to do that. I told them to worship you only. And then Isa ﷺ will address Allah, because it comes in the Quran, and the Prophet ﷺ would think about this verse regarding his own ummah. إن تعذبهم فإنهم عبادك وإن تغفر لهم فإنك أنت العزيز الحكيم. إنك أنت العزيز الحكيم. So the verse, إن تعذبهم, Ya Allah, if you punish them, إن تعذبهم فإنهم عبادك. If you punish them, then Ya Allah, they're your people. It's your choice. You have the right to punish them. The sovereignty is yours. وإن تغفر لهم, but if you forgive them, فإنك أنت العزيز الحكيم, then Ya Allah, you are dominant and you are all wise. So here what we affirm is that when we die, we go into the mercy of Allah and the Mashiach of Allah and the will of Allah. He does with His people as He wishes. If He wishes, غَفَرَ لَهُمْ, He will forgive them. وَإِن بِفَضْلِ, like Allah Ta'ala mentions, وَيَغْفِرُ مَا دُونَ ذَلِكَ لِمَنْ يَشَاء, that He will forgive other than shirk for whoever He wills, whatever He wills. It's not for me or you to limit the mercy of Allah in any way. وَإِن شَاءَ عَذَّبَهُمْ فِي النَّارِ بِعَدْلِ. Right? If He wanted to, Allah Ta'ala, out of His justice, He can punish those people in the fire of hell by His justice. ثم يخرجهم منها برحمة وشفاعة الشافعين من أهل طاعته ثم يبعثهم إلى جنته وذلك بأن الله تعالى تولى أهل معرفته ولن يجعلهم في الدارين. This is if Allah Ta'ala wills, He can punish those people out of His justice, and then after that short period of time remove them from the fire of hell, whether that's out of His mercy directly or whether that's through the intercession of other people. So remember, we spoke a few lessons ago, I believe, that the prophets will intercede, the awliya of the ummah will intercede, the scholars will intercede, the teachers will intercede, friends will intercede, the hafiz of the Quran will intercede, the alim of the deen will intercede for those who are around them, those that they know. Hence why spend time with scholars as much as you can, because it's a very, very blessed thing. And more than spending time with them, be scholars. Be scholars. And all these try to be scholars, be students of the deen. Be someone who, because of you, others are going paradise. Don't be someone who just wants to go paradise by clinging to the coattails of others. No, take as many with you as you can. Yeah? Make that intention. It's not beyond us. It really isn't. Yeah? It's not beyond us. It's through the mercy of Allah. And His, as we keep saying again and again, His mercy isn't limited to only a certain class of people. Yeah? You can only be a scholar if your dad was a scholar. Right? If your dad wasn't a scholar, then that's it. You have to just, you got to say over there. Right? No, that doesn't mean anything. Right? The knowledge of the deen is Allah's fadl. It's Allah's grace. Okay? And Allah tells us time and time again, Allah places His fadl wherever He wants to place it. Okay? The son of the scholar may be the biggest jahil in the world. And the son of the ignorant person may become the biggest alim of his time. Okay? This is not beyond any of us. And so make good firm intentions. So the shafa'ah of those who intercede, then Allah Ta'ala will send them to paradise. And that is because Allah Ta'ala takes care of those people who are mindful of Him. And no matter what our deeds are, right, we acknowledge, Ya Allah, we're weak, we make mistakes. But despite all of that, Ya Allah, we affirm You to be the Lord and the only Lord. None is worthy of worship except You, and we affirm time and time again all of these things, especially in those matters where somebody might be trying to tell us otherwise. There's 2 gods, there's 3 gods, there's 4 gods. La ilaha illallah. No matter how weak we are, but la ilaha illallah. Allah Ta'ala takes care of those people. Allah doesn't abandon such people, and He doesn't mistreat them in this world or the next world. Even the punishment of Allah is still a form of cleansing us. And ultimately, we end up in paradise. Ka'ahli nukratihi. Even those people who denied Allah, Allah Ta'ala doesn't treat those who accept Him and those who deny Him in the same way. Those who accept Him, Allah Ta'ala honors them. And those who deny Him, Allah Ta'ala rejects them. And don't be under no illusions. They didn't receive any of that. Allahumma, this is a dua. Allahumma, so you may as well read this with me. This is a dua which Imam Al-Tahawi says. So we repeat this dua, and we'll translate it as well. We repeat this dua, not because they're my words, but we have trust in the words of Imam Al-Tahawi being an accepted Imam ala al-Islam. Hatta nalqaka bih. Say it again. Allahumma ya waliya al-Islam wa ahli thabbitna ala al-Islam hatta nalqaka bih. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. What does it mean? Oh Allah, the guardian of Islam and the guardian of the people of Islam. Us, our guardian. Oh Allah, the guardian of Islam, the guardian of the people of Islam. Make us firm and steadfast upon Islam until we meet you. This dua is like so jame and so powerful that it's one that we should make a habit of reading. If you can't memorize the Arabic, learn English. Can't memorize the Arabic, learn the English. If you can memorize the Arabic, that's even better. But if you can't memorize the Arabic, learn the English. Allahumma ya wali al-Islami wa ahli thabbitna ala al-Islami hatta nalqaka bih. And then in the next chapter he says, وَنَرَى الصَّلَاةَ خَلْفَ كُلِّ بَرٍّ وَفَاجِرٍ مِنْ أَهْلِ الْقِبْلَةِ وَعَلَى مَنْ مَاتَ مِنْهُ. He says that we consider to be jaiz, and we consider to be acceptable praying behind every righteous and every sinful person of the believers. So what does this refer to? It means that we don't not pray behind someone because of their actions. So if somebody is like a sinful person, we don't not pray behind them. The other issue though is about their beliefs. If the issue falls under misguided beliefs, then the ulama have said that there's room there not to pray behind them. But it comes back to some discussions which are a little bit more technical, which, like we talked about the janazah discussion, that some ulama draw distinctions between the people of knowledge and the general masses to avoid fitna and things. But there is a lot more detail to this mas'ala. It's not just a yes or a no. وَعَلَى مَنْ مَاتَ مِنْهُمْ. And we consider jaiz to pray over any of the believers that die. So we wouldn't turn around and say, oh, this person is not a good believer, he's not a practicing person, he didn't pray, I'm not going to read his janazah. Remember I said last week the more detail for the person who is like a scholar, like a notable person, muqtada they tend to say, somebody who's followed in the community, as opposed to the general masses. وَلَا نُنَزِّلُ أَحَدًا مِّنْهُمْ جَنَّةً وَلَا نَارًا. Nor do we affirm expressly that one person specifically is going to the hellfire or is going to paradise. Yeah, we don't give tickets to paradise out. Yeah. You know, although it happens in our gatherings, but unfortunately we're not from those people that say, you know, wave your hands around if you want to get paradise. Yeah. Paradise doesn't come from waving your hands around. Paradise comes, am hasibtum an tadkhulul jannah walamma ya'lamillahu alladhina jahadu minkum. Did you think that you would go to paradise and Allah wouldn't test which of you tries hard? Jahadu minkum. Paradise isn't easy to attain in that sense. Like we see in some of generations, paradise is surrounded by makare. Paradise is surrounded by hardships. Right? It's difficulties. You've got to yearn to get to paradise. If paradise was as simple as throwing your arms around, then everybody would go paradise. Right? Don't fall into the traps. Right? Don't fall into these traps. Right? Be people of knowledge, not people of like crazy love. Be people of knowledge, because knowledge is the thing which will give us success. وَلَا نَشْهَدُ عَلَيْهِمْ بِكُفْرٍ وَلَا بِشِرْكٍ وَلَا بِنِفَاقٍ مَا لَمْ يَظْهَرْ مِنْهُمْ شَيْءٍ مِنْ ذَلِكَ. We don't testify against any of them of kufr. So we wouldn't say that such a person is a kafir, nor would we say that such a person has done shirk, nor would we say that such a person has done is a hypocrite, nor would we say any of these matters so long as nothing manifests from them. So for example, are we allowed to say that a Christian person is a disbeliever? What do we think? Yes? There's one answer. Anybody else? Decide. What do we think? Are you allowed to say that a Christian is a disbeliever? Yes. Why are you allowed to say that a Christian is a disbeliever? Because you see the signs of kufr on them. Right? They're telling you about these three gods. They're telling you about, you know, Jesus dying and being raised in the blood of Christ and this, that, this. These are signs of kufr. So these matters appear. So this is kufr. So you're allowed to apply that ruling. Somebody who, for example, says I'm a Muslim, doesn't say anything against Islam in that way, doesn't say anything against the beliefs of Islam, are you allowed to say that that person is a kafir? No. Remember we talked about the takfir of Ahlul Qibla and these Facebook warriors and things. It's very dangerous. Very dangerous. Are you allowed to say that this person is a hypocrite? No. Remember, hypocrite is the same thing as saying he's a kafir. A munafiq is a type of kafir. So when you say that this person is munafiq, in other words, you're simply saying that this person is a kafir, and that's dangerous. Nobody is able to testify to nifaq except the Prophet ﷺ. And that time has gone. The Prophet ﷺ, he gave the secrets. Right? There was one of the Sahaba who was called the secret keepers of the Prophet ﷺ. Yeah, the secret keepers of the Prophet ﷺ. Who was that Sahaba and what was the secret that he was given? He was given the names of the munafiqeen. Who was that Sahabi? Does anyone know? Yeah. Sayyidina Hudhayfa ibn Yaman. So my little one over there that's running around jumping, causing havoc for this side of the room, I do apologize. Right? But his name is Hudhayfa. So we named him after Sayyidina Hudhayfa ibn Yaman, the secret keeper of the Prophet ﷺ. But the Prophet ﷺ, after his time, I can't come up today and say, oh, he's a munafiq, she's a munafiq, this is a munafiq, because the ruling of nifaq is something that I can't say. You're not allowed to declare somebody to be a munafiq in our time. That's not something which I or you or anyone after the Prophet ﷺ, aside from the ones who the Prophet affirmed, have been given knowledge of that. So that's why he says, وَلَا نَشْهَدُ عَلَيْهِمْ بِكُفْرٍ وَلَا بِشِرْكٍ وَلَا بِنِفَاقٍ مَا لَمْ يَظْهَرْ مِنْهُمْ شَيْءٌ مِنْ ذَلِكَ وَنَذَرُ سَرَائِرَهُمْ إِلَى اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. How do we deal with people? We give ruling on the zahir. نَحْكُمُ بِالظَّوَاهِرِ. We look at the apparent, what do we see, and then we give ruling accordingly. As for the inner secrets and the innermost matters, in those issues, then what do? We assign that to Allah Ta'ala. So what I can see of a person, a decent guy, prays namaz, is a believer. Inside that person may be the biggest kafir of our time, but the sara'ir, the secrets, they are for Allah. As for the realities of what we are seeing, what we're apparently seeing, the zahir, that remains, that's all we can judge by. The innermost realities, the intentions, the sincerity, and all of these things, that we leave to Allah Ta'ala. And then finally he says in this section, and we'll finish on this point, he says, وَلَا نَرَى السَّيْفَ عَلَى أَحَدٍ مِّنْ أُمَّةِ مُحَمَّدٍ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ إِلَّا مَنْ وَجَبَ عَلَيْهِ السَّيْفِ. And he says that we don't deem it permissible to raise the sword against anyone from the believers. Right? The blood of a Muslim has a sanctity. The blood of a Muslim has a deep sanctity in Islam. One of the worst things that you can do in Islam, man qatala nafsan, the idea, فَكَأَنَّمَا قَتَلَ النَّاسَ جَمِيعًا. Whoever killed one person, it's as though they've killed the whole of humanity. The sanctity of an innocent person's blood. In Islam, the blood of a Muslim is one of the most valuable things that there is, and it's one of the most heavy things that happens. In one of the battles, after the battle was finishing, one of the Sahaba was chasing a person who, before the battle, was a disbeliever. And as he was chasing him, just as he caught up to him, the person turns around and says to the Sahabi, La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah. The Sahabi killed him anyway. The Sahabi killed him anyway. When the news reached the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ became so angry with this person, he stopped him, he called him. He said, did you kill him after he said, La ilaha illallah? You killed him after he said, La ilaha illallah. The Prophet took him to task so heavily that that person says, I wish I became Muslim after that day. What does that sentence mean? I wish I became Muslim after that day. Because when a person does sins and then they become Muslim, Islam wipes out all of the previous sins. Meaning, it was such a major mistake that I'd made that I wish that I had Islam after that, so that mistake could have been wiped out. And he says the Prophet ﷺ becomes so angry with him that you killed him after he said La ilaha illallah, you killed him after he said La ilaha illallah. And then he said, Ya Rasulullah, he said it because he was scared. And the Prophet in that state of anger, he said, did you split open his chest and check inside that he said it out of fear and he was lying? Now bring yourselves to our times. Muslims killing Muslims. The blood of Muslims being spilt in every part of the world. One place in the world where Muslim blood isn't being spilt. Whether it's being caused by those people or whether it's actually happening in those lands. Allah Ta'ala protect us from ever spilling the blood of a Muslim, harming another Muslim, going against another Muslim. This is something which we should remind ourselves. And you start, now this is the thing, we can always complain and say that at an international level, Muslims aren't honoring Muslims. Don't start at that level, start at your level. You honor those around you because they're Muslim. If everyone in our community, for example, started honoring each other because they're Muslims, then what would happen? Our community becomes a community that honors Muslims. The next community becomes it, then the country becomes it, then the international stage becomes that. And then our leaders will become people who honor Muslims as well. Because as the Quran tells us time and time again, what? إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. And words similar to this lesson, that indeed Allah Ta'ala doesn't change what is in a people until those people change what is in themselves. You have to change what's in yourself in order for what's happening to you to change. One of the key problems in our time, as I say, the fact that people don't respect the sanctity of other Muslims. That's why Imam Al-Tahawi reminds us all those years ago, he says that we do not deem it permissible to raise the sword against anyone from the Ummah of the Prophet ﷺ, except, there's an exception, except those against whom it's been wajib from the state. In other words, the state, the qadi, the judge, the sultan, the caliph, the leader, he punishes that person through the rules of had. In that situation, then taking the life of another believer is allowed. Other than that, it's not allowed. The sanctity of the blood of a believer. So we'll stop there, inshallah. In the next lesson, there's rebelling against Muslim leaders, wiping the homophobia. So there's a couple of chapters to go, inshallah. We're on track, inshallah, to finish by Ramadan, as I mentioned last time as well. So inshallah, we'll have like probably about 4 or so lessons to go before Ramadan. Inshallah, we'll plan it so that we are finishing by Ramadan. Are there any questions?
What would be the ruling on someone who they claim they're Muslim, but they clearly state that they are homosexual, for example, but they don't say that they remain silent on whether it's forbidden in Islam or not, or through their actions advocating and encouraging that.
So the question is, what do we say of people who say that I'm Muslim and homosexual? So the answer is that we would deem them to be sinful Muslims, or we still affirm that they're Muslims. So why do we affirm that they're Muslims? Because of what we read today. Major sins don't deem a person to be a kafir. So long as they don't deem it to be halal. So homosexuality is wrong in Islam, and that's not something we should be shying away from, right? If somebody wants to be homosexual, then let them be homosexual. Just in the same way that we say drinking is haram in Islam, but if you want to go drink on Saturday night and get drunk, then go for it, that's your problem. Likewise, if somebody wants to be homosexual, then let them. But it's haram in Islam. We as Muslims aren't going to change Islam because you had a change of heart thinking that you like men or you like women. For Islam gives us our code of morality. Our morality isn't by the society, our morality is divine morality through the religion. Our religion tells us homosexuality is wrong, it's a sin, so it's a sin. Right? So therefore we would say that this person is sinful, but can still be a Muslim. In regards to the second part of your question, where he's silent on whether it's wrong or right, that silence isn't the same as denial. Silence isn't an active like denial or active statement of permissibility. So in that situation, we would say that this person is propagating that which Islam deems to be wrong, but he's still a Muslim. He's still a Muslim. The problem comes when somebody comes and now says that homosexuality is allowed in Islam, and then you get into dangerous territory.
So even though this individual may be propagating it on a global scale, because he's not spoken for the religion, we would...
You stay silent. Yeah. Remember, the bar for kufr is extremely high. The bar for kufr is very, very high.
Just coming up to that one, if someone says that homosexuality is a problem, is that kufr there? Because they don't believe in
Remember, I said that the bar for the bar for kufr is very, very high. So what do I mean by that? When you say that the bar is so high, you have to affirm that they've denied a nas of the Quran or a nas of the hadith, which is qat'i. The minute you get into this territory of where there's some room for ambiguity or interpretation, in terms of the establishing of the text, it's a bit complex, but simple, but you would affirm absolute misguidance from these people, even if they say it's correct, but you may not affirm kufr. Now it just depends. Off the top of my head, I don't know exactly whether these type of issues are affirmed from qat'i nusus or not. But as I say, these are more scholarly issues. For people like I or you, we would simply say it's wrong. So don't even get into the whole, is propagating is fine or not. This even propagating is wrong, telling people it's wrong. It's just a question of how sinful it is. I often say this to people who ask me about the ruling of, I'm not going to look at anyone in particular, but the ruling of cigarettes, right? People who smoke. Right? Nobody ever discusses, right, is smoking mustahab? Is it sunnah ghair mu'akkada? Is there this much reward if you do on Shab Barat? Is it 27th night? I've read my nawafil, shall I go out for a cigarette now? No, the scholars are just debating on how bad it is. Somebody says it's haram, another guy says it's makruh tahrimi, somebody says it's makruh this, makruh that. Everyone's just debating on how evil it is. Right? So it's the same type of thing. So you don't come out and say, well, I'm following that position where that guy said it's less evil. But you can follow him then, that's fine. So he's leading you to evil, go for it. Same for this. You'll know I was specifically looking at those people who I know to be non-smokers, because I don't want to fall foul of anyone. Any other questions? Yeah. person dies as a disbeliever, then
and they never heard about Islam.
a person dies as a disbeliever and never ever heard of Islam. So we would affirm that if a person lived like in this remote forest, rainforest, nobody ever saw Muslims, no social media, no internet, nothing, then we would say as Maturidis that that person, all he would be tasked with is believing that there is a God. Doesn't have to believe in the details, but as long as they believe that there is a God, then that person will be successful. Why? Because as Maturidis, we say, this is one of the differences between the Maturidi and the Ash'ari school. We as the Maturidis, we say that our intellect that Allah Ta'ala has given us alone is sufficient to deduce that there's a God. Not the details, not like this, his names and his attributes and all of that, just the concept of a God. Our intellect is enough to be able to deduce that. The Ash'aris, on the other hand, they would say that he doesn't even have to do that. If Islam never comes to them, he doesn't even have to deduce it by intellect, because the obligation of believing in a God comes from revelation for them. I say for them, but they're still from the Ahlul Sunnah. There are two schools of the Ahlul Sunnah, but that's the answer. Any questions? Yeah?
I don't think said that we don't believe Jesus was the Son of God.
Just negating kufr doesn't make you a believer. So just negating beliefs that are kufri doesn't make you a believer. Because remember, believing in Islam, as we talked about today, was actively accepting and testifying to the truth of certain beliefs. So somebody who's Christian who says, I don't believe that Jesus is the Son of God, that's a step in the right direction, and you might want to have more conversations with this person, because the logical next step then is, okay, well, what is he then? And then you introduce Islam to that person. Any other questions here?
Do you believe that the angels can see God to see Allah?
Do the angels see Allah? No. We wouldn't affirm that expressly, because I don't think it mentions it anywhere. Again, we wouldn't affirm it, because when it speaks about Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam, it doesn't expressly say that you saw Allah Ta'ala anywhere. The only one that we see is like Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam. Rabbi arini, let me see you. And even then it's lan tarani.